Hello, it's Jacob again, and in this video we'll be talking about currency. Now, Merriam-Webster defines currency as something that is in circulation as a means of exchange. And for our purposes, that's going to be good enough. Our interest in money is its role in trade, the way it facilitates trade. And currency is something that we take for granted, right? We're raised to think about it even from a very early age. But going back and looking at it more closely can give us insight into its place in the world. And in particular, in this lecture, I will be walking through the three functions of currency and how they developed over time, which should give you a better understanding of why we use the specific currencies that we do. And what are these three functions? Well, you'll see them in more detail over the course of the lecture, but they're one, currency is a medium or means of exchange. Currency is something that we exchange between each other as a proxy for goods and services. It is a thing which, as a rule, does not have value in and of itself, but is used as a sort of way of keeping score, a way of making claims on society's resources. It exists to eliminate the need for barter. Function number two, currency is a unit of account. Not only is it a means of exchange, but it's also a way of measuring value, of comparing different goods to each other. And moreover, it's a common unit of account as well, a sort of common language that people can speak to one another in commerce. And function number three, currency is a store of value. Not only does it facilitate trade in the here and now, but it also acts as a way that people can defer consumption. It acts as a way to trade over time by giving people a means to save wealth, even if they can't save it in the form of physical goods. Now, as a quick refresher, trade takes place when one person's marginal benefit of a good exceeds another person's marginal cost of providing the good in terms of the payment that must be made. And trade could refer to the sale of an existing good, or it could refer to producing a good to order. But either way, the difference between the marginal benefits and the marginal costs is the total surplus. And any offer person A can make to person B that is worth less than A's marginal benefits to A and more than B's marginal costs to B would be a viable trade. Any trade that can make B better off and also make A better off because A values it more than B is viable. Now, in a world with currency, there's a common language to express value. But in a world without currency, bargaining becomes much more difficult. Now, in principle, any bundle of goods can be priced in terms of a single good. You would just take one good and you would decide how many of another good is equally valuable. And the good that you measure all other goods by is called a numeraire. And I have some examples here of different goods being used as the numeraire. Our choices here are an hour of unskilled labor priced at $15, a pound log of ground chuck priced at about $7, and a haircut at Great Clips with tax included priced at about $18. This one I know has gone up since I made this PowerPoint. Now, we're accustomed to thinking of prices in terms of money, but one thing to understand is that, again, money is only meaningful to the extent that it is used to conduct trade. Money is a sort of fantasy we all indulge in order to smooth out the process. And it's even possible to teach economics without ever once making reference to money. You can't really teach economics without making reference to prices, but a price doesn't have to be expressed in cash. It's whatever you give up, and that price could be goods. And it's often very helpful to think this way. And many of you do this. You probably don't do this with everyday small purchases, but with large purchases. We often think less in terms of the money that's spent buying it, but rather in terms of the labor that's spent earning the money. If we were to use labor as our numeraire, and this is a technique you've probably already seen at this point in the semester, because Matt Ridley talks about the story about light, how the price of light in terms of work time has gone down over the ages. Well, if we were to express the price of dollars in terms of labor, then you would see that it would be 7/100ths of an hour. Yeah, I didn't translate into minutes. Maybe I should have. Or instead of saying that ground chuck costs $7, we might say it costs half an hour. Or that haircut costs 1.2 hours, an hour, 12 minutes. Because that's how much of your time you would have to give up in order to acquire one of those other objects. And we can do this in comparisons of goods to goods as well. If you're thinking in terms of ground chuck, you might say that to save $1 requires giving up 0.14 logs of ground chuck, or that it requires giving up sorry, I paused there because I have been fussing over this table so much. I had to go back and stop my whole lecture and correct it. You might say that if you wanted to take an hour of leisure, you would have to give up 2.14 pounds of ground chuck. Or if you wanted the haircut, you would have to give up um only 4/5. Yeah, 2/5 of a haircut. But in general, we can take any item or any service and translate all other prices into quantities of that good or service. And that's what's meant by the numeraire. The numeraire is sort of a measuring stick. It's a way of calculating value or of calculating opportunity cost by asking, if this is what I'm thinking of giving up, how much of it do I have to give up to acquire something else? Now, this is how people used to think, because in the very early days of civilization, this is how people conducted trade. They had to barter with strangers. That word barter means direct exchange of goods. There is no such thing as currency yet. Nobody has invented the concept of a common good, which serves as a stand in for other goods. And so, if you want to trade with someone else, you have to offer them another good or service of similar value. Now, in early societies, this was fine because people did not actually trade that much in the first place. Most people in early societies lived in extended kinship groups, what you would call a tribe or a clan or, something else of that nature. They're living in villages where pretty much everybody in the village is either directly related to them, they are their family, or they're a very close sort of family friend. Because people did also immigrate in the past, people did move around. But in general, everybody knows each other very intimately, and everybody feels a very strong sense of responsibility for each other for that same reason. Now, this didn't mean that these kinds of cultures didn't have self-interested behavior, like what someone like Adam Smith would study, because they did. Even within a family, there is definitely a lot of room for selfish behavior, just as there is also a lot of room for selfless behavior. But there was also a lot of implicit trade and implicit debts as well. People living within the same village wouldn't necessarily charge each other a fee to eat from the communal stew pot, to take from the cornfield, to sit by the fire that someone else had made. But there was an understanding that people had to carry their own weight. Your people will take care of you, but only if you take care of your people in return. But the world wasn't like some communist utopia. The reason why this system functioned was because most people were so self-sufficient, most villages produced so much of their own goods that they were able to function this way. But there was always trade with the outside world. And when you're trading with strangers, you cannot rely on trust and you cannot rely on uh, implicit bargains. There has to be some kind of concrete understanding with the stranger, and it has to be something that is readily enforceable. Because all cultures have a bias, all cultures have a xenophobic strain to them. And it's essentially an adaptation. It's a survival response. People that we do not know are threatening to us. You cannot trust them until they've earned your trust, essentially by joining your society. Now, the thing about this kind of early trade, and I'm speaking mostly of like the Paleolithic era, maybe even early Neolithic. We're talking Stone Age, cavemen and I just figured out how to farm type days. But this trade is almost always being done for a specific reason. Your people have certain resources on your land that you're capable of exploiting. Your people have certain knowledge that there's certain types of goods that you know how to make. Outsiders have different resources available. They have different proficiencies in manufacturing. And so they're going to be able to offer you things at rates that you would never be able to produce yourself or that you would never be able to produce at all. And likewise, you're able to offer them goods in return that they're not able to economically produce. And so this sort of trade tends to be very stable, very regular, and very limited in scope. And that means that barter is viable. People from different tribes are capable of setting up regular, perpetual trade routes with an agreed upon exchange rate. I have a big interest in American Indians, so I often think of their kinds of trade routes. Like, for example, the Cherokee swapping flint for Yalpon tea. They would use Yalpon tea in their sacred rituals, and that was grown in the South Carolina lowlands. On the other hand, the Cherokee happened to have an abundance of flint due to all the caves in the Appalachian Mountains. You would get networks of exchange like that. And to a limited extent, the chains could be extended even beyond just one pair of people. If you know that, even if the people you're bartering with don't know your other trade partners, you know that you can set up a chain of transactions that's capable of moving one good a very long distance. So, in terms of long distance trade, barter is still viable. But once you get past a certain scale in terms of the complexity of your society, barter is going to completely break down. And it's going to break down due to transaction costs. See, in that early Paleolithic, early Neolithic world I described, most people have essentially the same occupation. They're hunter-gatherers, or they're farmers, or early pastoralists. But whatever it is they do, pretty much everyone is employed in the occupation of growing food. And they, for the most part, make their own crafts, they make their own clothes. It's a world of self-sufficiency. So luxuries and certain strategic goods are the only things you have to trade. The problem with civilization is that at first, even before you get to the industrial world we know now, civilization enables people to progress due to the division of labor. You can have people, if you have enough people living in one spot, you can have some people devote all of their energy to practicing a specific craft, getting very good at it, right? Honing their skill to where they're able to produce much more efficiently. In some sense, that's how early civilizations expand. They become more efficient by reproducing themselves to give them more opportunities for this kind of specialization. But when you do this, when you have workers who don't take care of most of their needs, that means that they either have to be supported by the entire village's efforts or they have to barter with the entire village. Moreover, a typical village is not going to have specialists in everything. It's not going to be able to support people who work full time on one task. Over a larger area, like say a stretch of countryside and one big city, that's viable. But this also means that people are now having to source much more of their needs from strangers. They're constantly dealing with strangers, which means that they're constantly having to renegotiate. They're constantly having to establish trust. They're constantly having to barter with all of these different people for every single need that they have. That concept of transaction costs that you got from that first came up with the coast bargaining in the externalities lectures, that comes back here. And so, as civilization develops, as it inevitably springs up anywhere that you have very high population densities, generally caused by very high productivity in food production. It's usually assumed to mean agriculture, but agriculture is not the only way to do it. There have been civilizations based on fruit orchards, civilizations based on fishing, civilizations based on animal husbandry. As you develop civilization, this growing complexity is going to require a different way of conducting trade. See, the biggest problem with barter is that it depends on what's called the double coincidence of wants. Person A has to have something that person B wants, and person B has to have something that person A wants. But the more people that you're dealing with and the more things that you're trying to buy, the harder this condition gets to satisfy. And you would spend all day trying to wheel and deal, set up these complex Rube Goldberg machine sets of transactions to get what you need. But barter contains within it its own solution. What if there was a good that was universally desired and could keep? What if you had something that everybody wanted? Well, in that case, the producer could resell the good to someone else whenever they need. And that means that this one product could serve as a stand-in for all the products they actually want. You don't have to desire the payment that someone else offers you, as long as you are confident that you can sell that payment to somebody else. We'll pick up with commodity currencies in the next video.